From New York, in color, this is the CBS Evening News, with Charles Kuralt substituting for Walter Cronkite, who is on assignment in Downey, California, and John Hart in New York, Dan Rather in Washington, Ike Pappas in Washington, and tonight part one of a special report, Where They Stand, the candidates on the issues of Campaign 68.
Good evening. The Apollo 7 astronauts raced through their final hours in space today, steering their craft into a more favorable orbit for tomorrow's fiery return to Earth. Here's an animation of how the spaceship will appear as it starts its re-entry. And this is an actual film of such a re-entry, the unmanned Apollo 6 as it entered the Earth's atmosphere, film taken by a robot camera. This is the view the astronauts will have tomorrow as the craft begins its plunge to Earth at 17,200 miles an hour to a final parachute landing in the Atlantic near Bermuda. Through the window, the Earth's horizon can be seen as it rotates. Walter Cronkite today flew the re-entry mission.
Hello from the beautiful Apollo room high above everything. Or actually, this is a guidance and control simulator at Downey, California, North American Rockwell. And Earl Woosley, a North American Rockwell engineer, is going to show me, lying here in the command pilot's couch, how Shiraw and company will fly their re-entry tomorrow morning. Earl, I'll lie back down here and you take me through it, will you? All right, Earl, now, they're approaching Hawaii and they're getting ready for their re-entry procedure. Yes. They're going to pitch the spacecraft and its service module. They're still together, the whole thing.
That's correct.
They're going to pitch it around so that the service module engine is forward, and when they fire, it'll slow them down.
That's correct. They want the spacecraft such that when they make the burn, it is indeed a retro burn, which slows the spacecraft such that it will hit the proper entry corridor.
Right. Now, do they fire that engine manually?
They can fire this engine automatically or manually. The primary mode, of course, would be an automatic firing of the engine.
Now, the next thing they have to do is separate from that spacecraft. From that service module. How do they do that?
A separation from the service module for this particular mission, they will yaw the total spacecraft, command and service module, 45 degrees out of plane.
Now, let's see. They do that on this control handle here.
That's correct.
Just turning that around to the right.
Separation is accomplished just merely by putting these two switches in the up position. At this time, they will experience physical separation. They'll get a master alarm, which they will turn this light off just by depressing it there. We'll turn that off.
That'll come on to show me that I've separated.
That is correct.
Now, what am I going to be doing up here at this point? I'm getting at this critical point.
The commander will be orienting the command module to the aerodynamic trim attitude for his entry. In other words, he wants to put the blunt end forward, such that he will be in a proper orientation with respect to the wind when he hits the atmosphere.
And now, when they come back tomorrow morning, they're actually going to be on the computers. That they fire the SPS burn, slow down, and so forth. Then the computers take over, and the computers tell the little engines when to fire to get in just the right attitude control, and they simply read this out. At a given point, automatically the drogue chute deploys, and those are the two little chutes that come out and slow the spacecraft down so that then they pull the three main chutes out. But if that doesn't happen automatically, then they can punch these buttons and get that done, right? The drogue deploy and the main deploy.
This is a manual override.
And then once they splash down, then it's out of these seats and through the hatch, which is where?
Yeah, well, the hatch will be just behind you here.
Right. This is Walter Cronkite, CBS News, North American Rockwell, Downey, California.
CBS News live color coverage of the re-entry and recovery of Apollo 7 begins at 6:30 Eastern Time tomorrow morning.
What's been going on in American business lately is ironic. Business keeps growing, but profits aren't keeping pace. The cost of doing business is costing business profits. And the sad fact is, a big part of this profit squeeze is happening right under your nose. Today, it costs $2.54 to get a simple business letter written and out the door. $2.54 a letter. If you have 100 people in your office, each writing just 5 letters a day, it's more than $2.54. It's more than $304,000 a year. Too much of it in mistakes. American business has to find a better way to write.
During the next decade. Regards.
Dictating with IBM equipment is a better way. Nearly twice as fast as a secretary taking shorthand. And with the IBM MTST automatically turning a secretary's rough draft into a page of final copy every 2 minutes, secretaries can get those thoughts out the door, revisions included, in just about half the time. And since these 2 pieces of IBM equipment have increased people's productivity by as much as 50%, what you can get is part of that $300,000 back.
North Vietnamese prisoners were set free in an American whale boat off North Vietnam's coast today. They were released during a special 36-hour ceasefire that covered an area around the city of Vien, and they landed without incident. United States officials described the release as a goodwill gesture aimed at encouraging Hanoi to free more American airmen. But there were some observers who saw it as another hopeful sign that something positive may soon come out of the talks in Paris. The spokesman for the North Vietnamese delegation in Paris called off his weekly news conference at the last minute today, sending word that he wasn't feeling well. That, too, produced speculation that Hanoi is nearing a decision on whether to accept American terms for an end to the bombing. In the war, there was again little or no ground action, but 24 Americans were killed when an Air Force transport plane crashed in the Central Highlands. Engine failure was given as the cause. Retired General Curtis LeMay, back from a brief fact-finding trip to Vietnam, today challenged the idea that the lull in fighting signals a de-escalation by Hanoi. At a news conference in Washington, he gave this reason for decreased enemy activity.
They have suffered very heavily, and as a result of this, the bulk of the organized units have gone back into sanctuaries, either into Cambodia, Laos, or in North Vietnam, or have gotten into the jungle where they can't be found. As a result, the activity by organized units has almost ceased. The terrorist activity and the small guerrilla activity still goes on, however. In the north, the situation is different. We have ceased all bombing activity, as you know, north of the 19th parallel. So they've had some time to rebuild, and they have. The damage done by the bombing has, to a large measure, been repaired. Bridges are up, and in many cases there are 2 or 3 bridges. Other cases, at choke points and so forth, there have been several bypasses built. The harbor is full of ships. Every berth is occupied continuously. The overflow is anchored in the harbor, and lighters are being used to unload it. There's ample evidence of a tremendous flow of supplies of war moving south at a higher rate than ever before, because it is unhampered. It all adds up to me that there's no indication that they are beaten by any sense of imagination, that they are planning further military activity. Otherwise, they wouldn't be spending the great effort to move supplies to the south.
There's been a lull in the fighting in the past month. Would you consider that a concession on the part of the communists?
No, I don't consider that a concession. I just got through telling you what happened to those people. They were cut to pieces and defeated, and they were withdrawn into sanctuaries. That's not a concession.
Richard Nixon tonight sought to counteract George Wallace's appeal to northern blue-collar workers. In a talk prepared for a nationwide radio broadcast, Nixon said he would increase job opportunities for Negroes without displacing white union workers. That could be done, he said, through economic policies that would produce 15 million new jobs.
Hi, Ed. How's the real estate tycoon?
Oh, knock it off, will you, Lefty? I haven't sold a house in weeks. I don't know, something's wrong. Maybe it's my breath or something.
Listen, Ed, we're both in the contact business, meeting the public, right?
Right.
That's why I use Listerine. Kills germs that can cause bad breath. Works for hours.
Hey, Lefty, I sold 2 houses this week. You sure gave it to me straight.
So does Listerine Antiseptic. Kills germs, keeps breath fresh for hours.
When you're upset, tense, nerves snap, and each mounting pressure may start the flow of excess acid in your stomach. Result? Acid indigestion, heartburn, that burning sensation. But Rolaids, with its exclusive buffering compound, has thousands of absorbent particles. Each consumes 47 times its weight in excess stomach acid, gives fast, lasting relief. Rolaids consumes 47 times its weight in excess stomach acid.
Hubert Humphrey today began the final 2 weeks of Campaign 68 by concentrating on New York's 43 electoral votes. One event on his full day's schedule was a rally in Manhattan's Herald Square. John Hart reports.
Hubert Humphrey is spending this week half of his remaining campaign in only 3 states, but they are big electoral states where by all indicators he trails Richard Nixon. New York, where he's close behind, Texas close behind, and California way behind. But Humphrey these days is in the throes of optimism.
And on Election Day, I predict not a miracle on 34th Street, but a Democratic miracle on Main Street all across the United States. And why do I make this prediction? Because I think the central question that needs to be asked is, who do we trust in this country of ours to lead America in the next 4 years? Who can we trust that will help keep this country prosperous, that will help keep jobs, that will help take care of our elderly, that will help provide for our children for an education? Who can we trust? And I want to say to my business friends, that it's all right for you to say you're a Republican. I understand that. Goes over good in social circles. Sometimes it makes you feel better. But I want to tell you, if you want to live like a Republican, you better vote Democratic. That's the way to live like one. Great.
As Hubert Humphrey likes to say, there are 14 more shopping days for getting a president. And when it's upswing against front-runner, that fact may be bigger now than any issue. John Hart, CBS News, with the Humphrey campaign, Herald Square, New York.
President Johnson got a new car today, and like the next-door neighbor, CBS News White House correspondent Dan Rather took a look at it.
The newest presidential limousine is a gadget-loaded 1969 Lincoln Continental, 21 feet long, weight well over 6,000 pounds. It has a 340-horsepower engine. President Johnson took time out to give the manufacturer an effusive commercial plug for supplying the monster. Among the new features is a slide-back roof, allowing the president and guests to stand only partially exposed in motorcades. There is a hideaway rear running board for Secret Service men with hydraulic handholds. Manufacturers cost an estimated $500,000, but the White House has a courtesy rental arrangement whereby it costs taxpayers approximately only $1,000 a year. That doesn't include gasoline, which is no small item, since the new limousine gets as low as 3 miles to a gallon. Dan Rather, CBS News, the White House.
New York City's labor troubles were further compounded today when firemen voted to reject a new 2-year contract and began considering a work slowdown. More than 1,000 of the city's policemen, already engaged in a slowdown, called in sick today, while 3,000 off-duty policemen circled City Hall in a protest for higher pay. And the teachers' strike goes on with no sign of a settlement. The Boeing Company announced today a new fixed-wing design for America's first supersonic airliners, dropping the controversial movable wing it had originally proposed. The company said tests have shown that the heavier sweep wing seriously reduced the payload of the plane. When the Federal Aviation Administration picked Boeing as the prime contractor for the plane in 1967, It bypassed a fixed-wing design offered by Lockheed. There were reports from Warsaw and Budapest today that some of the Polish and Hungarian soldiers who've been occupying Czechoslovakia already have left that country. And sources in Prague said a number of Russian units have begun withdrawing. It's believed, however, that about 70,000 Soviet troops will remain under the terms of a treaty legalizing the occupation of Czechoslovakia. Prices were mixed on the New York Stock Exchange today. On a volume of 14,400,000 shares, the exchange index gained 6 cents.
Announcing a definite improvement on whipped cream. Cool Whip non-dairy topping. Cool Whip comes whipped. That's an improvement. It keeps whipped in your refrigerator. Another improvement. Cool Whip has lots less calories than whipped cream you make. Certainly an improvement. Now, about the taste.
Yum, 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 yum.
What's to improve?
Cool Whip.
Cool Whip from Birdseye.
On a Braniff airliner leaving South America, we served Sanka coffee to a real coffee lover without her knowing it.
Do you drink a lot of coffee? Well, 13 cups a day. Did you like the taste of our coffee? It tastes very good. It was Sanka coffee. Well, I don't see any difference. I mean, in the natural coffee that we drink in South America to the Sanka, I don't see any difference.
Surprising Sanka coffee. 97% caffeine-free.
CBS News' continuing state-by-state study today shows another loss of strength by Richard Nixon. The study, based on interviews with political leaders and analysis of various state opinion polls, still shows Nixon well ahead, but now puts Nixon's electoral vote total below the 270 needed to win. If the election were held today, Nixon could expect to carry 28 states with 256 electoral votes, a loss of 33 votes since last Monday, largely due to the shifting of Michigan and Texas to the toss-up column. George Wallace could expect 6 states and 58 electoral votes, a slight loss, and Hubert Humphrey could expect 3 states and the District of Columbia with 25 electoral votes, little change for Humphrey. Another 13 states with 199 electoral votes are rated toss-ups, although Nixon is leading in many of them. Before he went to California, Walter Cronkite prepared the following political report, the first of a series on the candidates and the issues.
In Campaign 68, as in all others of the past, the issues and where the candidates stand on them often become blurred in the day-to-day reports of campaign activity across the nation. This year, in the absence of televised debates, on the CBS Evening News, we will attempt to clarify this vital area of the presidential race with a series of special reports. Now, these reports are not a debate, perhaps but a poor substitute for debates, with their opportunity for cross-examination. But this, at least, we hope, will be a cataloging of where the candidates stand on the issues. Hubert Humphrey on October 9th and George Wallace on October 16th replied on film to our questions. Richard Nixon declined because he did not want to share a forum with Wallace. But Nixon's campaign organization made available videotape recordings of his campaign statements of his positions. Tonight, the first report deals with a major issue of 1968. The words law and order are figuring prominently in this campaign. Is this issue racist?
I reject a fashionable term that is used by some of our friends in the press and commentators and some political observers to the effect that law and order is a code word for racism. I don't buy that at all. I've talked to a lot of my friends in the black community, and they want law and order. They are the ones, the fear stalks the ghettos as well as the suburbs. They are the ones that suffer the most from organized crime, the numbers, the rackets, and all the other things that happen. And I would say that as far as that's concerned, when you say that law and order, you didn't, but when people say that law and order is a code word for racism, what they're doing is condemning, in effect, the whole Negro community and saying, in effect, they're the ones that are breaking the law. And that just isn't true.
Well, of course, there are those in certain portions of the news media and those who run against me that try to equate our stand with law and order with racism. But it's a sad day in our country when you cannot speak out against the destruction of cities, burning, looting, arson, and murder by a few. And I'm not talking about race. because the overwhelming majority of people of all races in this country are against this breakdown of law and order. But it's a sad day when you cannot talk about stopping such actions as that in the country without some liberal left-winger charging you with being a racist. I'm sick of it, and the American people are sick of it, and it's going to be stopped.
I'm sure that those who have done the most talking about law and order and have made it the central issue have included within that racial overtones and undertones. I don't think there's any doubt about it. We've been confronted in this nation for a long time with a rising rate of organized crime and of street crime. Much of it, by the way, regrettably, is attributable to young people, most of it. In fact, for the past 3 or 4 years, I recall that there has been no increase in adult crime. But there has been, and there has been an increase in what we call street crime and violence, riots. Now, the riots generally involve the black people. And when you talk about law and order, as the third-party candidate does, and frequently as the Republican candidate does, I think that a good deal of the emphasis is upon the riot situation. As they say, the looting and the burning and the arson and the sniping, all that comes in what we call the riot situation. There's been a lot of talk about law and order, and I'm prepared to talk about it too, because I think I know what we can do about it and what we need to do about it. There's never been any law enforced through demagoguery. There's never been a riot that's been subdued or suppressed through campaign oratory. It takes a great deal more than just that.
Is the issue of law and order one for local governments, or something the federal government should be concerned with?
I do not want the federal government setting up a police force which will move its tentacles out across the country into local law enforcement problems, because the problems differ in different cities, and I believe that the closer that responsibility can be to the people, the better. What I did refer to, however, is the setting up first of a national council on law enforcement, in which we have the Attorney General and the other cabinet officers who have anything to do with law enforcement working on this problem constantly, just as the National Security Council operates on foreign policy problems and as the Board of Economic Advisors operates on economic problems. Second, as far as the training of people are concerned, what I am recommending here is a national academy for the training of officers. And I believe that by raising the level of training through this National Academy, it will have a remarkable effect on raising the level of not only quality of those serving in police forces, but also eventually their pay. What we have to get down to here is this. It's a question of pay, it's a question of training, it's a question of quality.
Now, Mr. Nixon recommended a 4-point program. One of the points, he wanted to have a cabinet committee, a cabinet-level committee. We already have that. A second one, that's 2 years old. That's been functioning. Secondly, he wanted a coordination, a center of information to coordinate information on crime. We already have that. That's been going on for some time. The third thing he recommended was a federal institute for training officers, of police officers. We already have that. Mr. J. Edgar Hoover must have been surprised to hear Mr. Nixon say that, because the FBI has been training police officers and has gone into it in a much more extensive way in recent years than ever before. Now, I, as president, would recommend a much larger investment on the part of the federal government in law enforcement, in police giving block grants to cities for police salaries, for equipment. Now, it can be done, but as John Kennedy once said, peace and freedom are not cheap. And my friend, law and order are not cheap, but crime is more expensive. And the only way that I know to improve law and order and law enforcement in this country is to give the police the tools to do the job.
Well, the first thing they can do is to seek indictments against those at the federal who violate federal statutes of crossing state lines to bring about a riot, who engage in seditious activities of organizing and plotting to overthrow the government. And there's much documentary evidence that this is the case. They ought to seek out these people, those who stand up and say, let us destroy this city, and then wind up the week after that in Hanoi. There is a connection. And the Attorney General of our nation, instead of apologizing for this group of militants and activists who want to destroy our society ought to go before grand juries and get them indicted and then prosecute them to the full extent of the law and stick a few of them under jail and get them off the public. And when I become the president, I'm going to have my attorney general to do just that. I'm sick of people that sit down and plot to overthrow the government, plot to destroy a city, cross state lines to create a riot, and the attorney general of our country sits back and spends all of his time busing school children in Los Angeles or Chicago. No wonder the country has come to a sad state of affairs, and we have anarchy prevailing in our streets. I would also ask the Congress to change some of the decisions of the court that have handcuffed the police. I would make Washington a model city, regardless of what it took, of peace and tranquility. I would speak out as president in support of the police and firemen of the country. And if I'm elected president, I will carry enough congressional districts in states and cities that is going to put some backbone in many mayors and governors who themselves have handcuffed the police in enforcing the law. And in my judgment, that will help bring about a restoration of law and order in the country.
Our next report will deal with the problems of the cities.
Burger Chef presents The Family Circus.
Daddy, can we each have a fripple free?
Sure. 5 fripple frees. I mean triple treats.
Join the family circus for a fripple free, a triple treat. Let's all go to Burger Chef.
The music has died, the wedding guests have departed, and Mr. and Mrs. Aristotle Onassis are secluded aboard the bridegroom's yacht, alone, except for the boat's 45 crew members. Soon, perhaps tomorrow, the yacht will depart the Greek Isle, where Mrs. Kennedy became Mrs. Onassis, and speed the couple away from the inky, insistent wretches of the press, who, over the weekend, forced Mrs. Kennedy to negotiate her passage down the quayside.
Have a let through now.
Λοιπόν, η κυρία λέει θα την αφήσετε να περάσει και θα σας ξαναφωνάξει. Θα δώσετε την ευκαιρία να ξανατραβήξετε φωτογραφίες.
Σήμερα ή αύριο.
Αύριο.
The cameramen retired to a respectful distance, permitting such film as this, a blissful bride-to-be surrounded by her family, strolling in the Ionian sunshine. But the truce with the press didn't last, and neither did the sunshine. Wind, rain, sleet, and cameramen descended on the wedding. Rain is supposed by tradition to be good luck in Greece, but tradition doesn't say anything about a force 9 gale, and that is what is still blowing in Greece, delaying the honeymoon. The couple will live, at least initially, in New York. This is Charles Kuralt for Walter Cronkite. Good night.
That's what happiness is.
Happiness is many things to many people.
Happiness is. Happiness is. Happiness is.
To a smoker, happiness is the taste of a Kent cigarette.
That's what happiness is.
What makes a smoker happy? That's easy. Flavor. The flavor that comes from fine tobacco. And millions of smokers will tell you that's what you get with a Kent. So light one up. Get a taste of what happiness is. Get the good taste of a Kent cigarette.
Happiness is the taste of Kent. Happiness is the taste of Kent. Happiness is the taste of Kent. Good taste, fine tobacco. That's what happiness is.
Join the millions of smokers everywhere who know.
To smokers, it's a Kent.
Direct from our newsroom in New York in color, this has been the CBS Evening News with Charles Kuralt substituting for Walter Cronkite.